They won't say it out loud. There will be no grand announcement from Capitol Hill or Downing Street. No official document will declare it, but behind closed doors in the quiet rooms of power there is a growing fear. A silent, unspoken tension rising in the Western world. It is not the fear of war, not even the fear of economic loss. It is the fear of something deeper, the fear of India's rise not just as a nation, but as a force of consciousness. In 2025, India is no longer the land of snake charmers and call centers. It is the land of data sovereignty, quantum computing, space innovation, and cultural resurgence. The West had written its own script for India, forever developing, always dependent, occasionally celebrated, but never equal. But that script is now obsolete. India is writing its own story, and that terrifies them. Why? Because power has always rested not just in weapons or wealth, but in the power to shape reality. And for centuries, the West has monopolized that power. They wrote the books, they made the rules, they defined what civilization, progress, and success meant. But now, India is breaking free, not just economically, but intellectually, spiritually, and strategically. It is no longer borrowing the West's lens to view itself. It is creating its own. When a country with over 1 billion people begins to think for itself, act for itself, and dream for itself, the balance of power shifts. Not with noise, but with gravity, and that is what the West fears, not India's noise, but its silence. Not its chaos, but its clarity. Not its GDP, but its direction. In 2025, India is the world's most populous democracy. Its youth are not just in search of jobs, they are in search of meaning. And that's dangerous to any system that relies on consumerism, conformity, and control. India is exporting software, satellites, spirituality, and self-confidence. This is not soft power. This is soul power, and it cannot be colonized. Western fear of India is not new, but it has evolved. Once they feared India as a colony rising in rebellion. Now, they fear India as a civilization rising in relevance. The British came for spices and stayed for centuries. Now they return as investors, only to find India investing in itself. It builds its own highways, sends its own rockets, runs its own digital economy. It negotiates with giants, not as a beggar, but as a broker. This rise isn't accidental. It's generational, and more importantly, it's intentional. India is not rising because the world is being kind. India is rising because its people refuse to remain asleep. The youth that once wanted to leave are now staying. The minds that once followed are now leading. The voices that were once quiet are now shaping the global discourse. And yet, the West is confused, because they see India with their old lenses: poverty, pollution, population. But they miss the new India: purpose, potential, and perseverance. What the West doesn't understand, it fears. And what it fears, it tries to control. But this is a different India. You cannot control 1 billion minds awakening. You cannot silence a civilization rediscovering its voice. You cannot compete with a country that sees time not in decades, but in millennia. The West is scared, not of a threat, but of a mirror. India reminds them of what they lost, of values replaced by vanity, of community replaced by consumption, of humility replaced by hubris. India's spiritual compass terrifies them more than any nuclear arsenal. Because it challenges the very foundation of their cultural arrogance, they cannot understand a country that prays before it plans, that meditates before it innovates, that bows before it builds. What frightens the West is not that India is becoming like them, but that India is succeeding by being itself, that it is rising without surrendering its soul. Look at the world stage in 2025. India is not begging for a seat at the table. It is building its own. in trade, in tech, in diplomacy, in defense. From the G20 to BRICS, India is not a participant. It is a pivot. Nations look to it not just for deals, but for direction. And the West notices, but they don't applaud. They scrutinize. They create narratives of intolerance, of chaos, of instability. They paint India as divided, distracted, dangerous. Why? Because if the world sees India clearly, it will see the West differently. And the illusion of superiority breaks. They don't fear India's failure. They fear India's success. Because a successful India proves that progress does not have to be Western to be real. It shows that development doesn't need to abandon tradition, that science and spirituality can coexist, that unity doesn't require uniformity. India is a paradox to the Western mind. A land where temples and tech parks share space, where ancient mantras echo next to artificial intelligence, where the youth touch elders' feet and launch startups. This is not confusion. This is fusion, and it is the future. The Western fear is subtle, but deep. It is the fear that their century may be over, that the power they once held may be diffusing, that the torch they carried may now pass to hands that they once oppressed, and yet India carries no bitterness. It is not rising to dominate, but to demonstrate, not to avenge, but to awaken. It offers the world not a new empire, but a new example. In 2025, India teaches the world that strength is not loudness.